The cold metal floor vibrated beneath Kane's knees, the hum of the Galactic Council's warship thrumming through his bones. His wrists, bound behind him with reinforced synth rope, ached, but the pain was an afterthought. His head was bowed, hair matted with dried blood. His suit, torn, stained, but still clinging to the last remnants of dignity, was the only thing left untouched. They wanted him to look like a man at his execution, not the monster they whispered about. A heavy boot struck his ribs. Kane grunted, rolling with the impact rather than resisting. The Void Stalker who delivered the blow, one of the faceless cybernetic assassins, leaned down, blue optics glowing cold. Your species should have stayed in the shadows where it belonged. The voice, synthetic, devoid of inflection, dripped with arrogance. You're an insect playing at gods. Kane said nothing, his breathing steady, heartbeat controlled. Silence was his weapon. The other assassins stood around him in a loose circle, their sleek black armor glinting under the dim overhead lights. Each bore the signature emblem of the Galactic Council's enforcers, a spiraled insignia of domination, the mark of those who had never lost a war. Until now, from the shadows, a more imposing figure stepped forward. The air around him buzzed with authority. Overseer Vexlar, draped in flowing crimson robes, his scaled skin shifting with iridescent malice, regarded Kane as one might a rabid beast in a cage. There it is, Vexlar mused, circling him. The infamous Baba Yaga, the demon of humanity. I had expected more. Kane's lips curled, just slightly, a sliver of amusement. And I expected smarter captors. Vexlar's reptilian eyes narrowed. You think your defiance matters? He gestured, and a holoscreen materialized before them, displaying a vast network of council dignitaries watching the feed. The galaxy will watch as we break you. They will see your kind kneel. That is your legacy. Kane met his gaze, unflinching. You don't understand what you've done, do you? His voice was calm, steady, deadly. Vexlar scoffed. Enlighten me. Kane exhaled slowly. You captured a human. A pause. Then quietly, but you should have killed a god. A flicker of unease rippled through the chamber. The Void Stalkers, beings engineered without emotion, shifted almost imperceptibly. Vexlar, ever perceptive, sensed it too. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You are nothing but a man, a relic of a species too stubborn to know when it has lost. Kane let his head tilt slightly, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. If that were true, you wouldn't be afraid. The Overseer straightened, irritation flaring in his slitted pupils. Take him to interrogation. I want his spirit shattered before we make our example. Two stalkers hauled Kane to his feet, dragging him down the cold corridors of the warship. The halls were pristine, sterile, a far cry from the battlefield where blood and steel determined fate. Inside the chamber, they strapped him upright to an energy frame. The hum of containment fields flickered to life, locking him in place. A technician adjusted dials, a dozen metallic arms whirring into motion, each ending in a tool designed for pain. The first surge hit like fire through his veins. His body arched involuntarily, every nerve igniting in agony. The stalkers watched without reaction, their glowing optics scanning his vitals. A lesser being would have screamed. Kane breathed in, held it, let the pain wash over him. He exhaled. The machine recalibrated, increased voltage. Biosensors struggled to measure an expected response. The human's heartbeat should have spiked. Cortisol should have flooded his system. But nothing. Curious. The lead technician adjusted the settings. Humans have always exhibited pain responses. This one is different. Kane chuckled, a low, dark sound. The technician hesitated. Vexlar's voice crackled through the speakers. Break him. The next wave of torment struck, needles of raw energy burning through his nervous system. His vision blurred, muscles spasmed. But still no scream. The lead Void Stalker stepped forward, gazing into Kane's half-lidded eyes. Explain. How are you resisting? Kane's lips parted, his voice hoarse but steady. Because pain is just a signal. and I don't listen to noise. The machine overloaded, sensors failing to quantify the anomaly before them. Kane's vitals steadied. His breathing normalized. The interrogators, creatures who had reduced empires to dust, felt something they had never before experienced. Doubt. The door hissed open. A subordinate approached Vexlar, voice cautious. Sir, there's an issue. The overseer turned, impatient. What now? Our analysts have been studying human warfare. We believed them primitive, limited. The officer hesitated. But there are inconsistencies. Vexlar frowned. Explain. The officer swallowed. They shouldn't have survived their own history. Every calculation suggests they should have wiped themselves out centuries ago. Yet they thrive. They win wars they shouldn't. Their casualties mean nothing to them. They evolve under pressure instead of breaking. Vexlar scoffed. Are you suggesting we should fear them? A pause. Then, carefully, Sir, I believe we already do. Inside the chamber, Kane tilted his head up slightly, meeting the stalker's gaze. His voice, quiet, deliberate, cut through the silence. Tell me something. A beat. Have you ever seen a human in a real fight? No answer. He smiled, slow, predatory. You will. The frame restraining him flickered. A short burst of static. The stalkers turned toward the technician. Power surge, the technician muttered, tapping at his console. We're losing system integrity. A snap, a crackle, a brief fatal glitch. Then Kane was free. The cold wind cut through the execution grounds, howling over the desolate ice plains. Snow fell in thick sheets, swirling around the towering black monolith at the center of the arena. High above, the Galactic Council's warships hovered in silence, their presence a reminder that this was not merely an execution. It was a demonstration, a warning to any who would dare oppose their rule. Kane stood at the center of it all, wrists bound once more, this time to a towering steel pylon. His suit, blood-stained and torn, barely provided warmth against the freezing air. The sting of frostbite bit at his exposed skin, but he paid it no mind. Pain was irrelevant. Fear, non-existent. He had been in worse places. The Void Stalkers formed a tight semicircle around him, their armor reflecting the harsh glow of the execution lights. Each assassin stood motionless, weapons at the ready, their glowing optics locked onto their prisoner, a signal away from ending this. Above them, the execution was broadcasted across the Council's communication networks. Billions of eyes watched, races who had long feared humanity, now witnessing its so-called downfall. Overseer Vexlar's voice crackled through the speakers. John Kane, you stand condemned by the Galactic Council for crimes against stability. You are sentenced to death. Kane's breathing remained steady, the ice beneath his feet slick with the blood of those who had come before him. He raised his head slightly, scanning his surroundings. Not looking for an escape, there was none. Not yet. He was looking for opportunities. Weakness. The lead Void Stalker stepped forward, an energy blade extending from his gauntlet with a low hum. He moved with the efficiency of something beyond organic, a weapon in humanoid form. Kane exhaled slowly. They thought this was over. They had no idea it was only beginning. The blade arced downward, aimed straight for his chest. The moment the stalker stepped in, Kane moved. A sharp twist of his wrists, ligaments straining against the force. Then a sickening pop as his thumbs dislocated. His hands slipped free of the restraints in a fraction of a second. By the time the blade struck, he was already moving, body twisting sideways. The energy weapon sizzled against empty air. Before the assassin could recover, Kane struck. His fingers found the weak point between the stalker's neck plating, and with a brutal snap, the alien's spinal column was severed. The body collapsed before anyone had time to process what had just happened. Then the world erupted into chaos. The other stalkers reacted, weapons raised. Kane had already grabbed the fallen assassin's sidearm, rolling into cover as energy blasts cut through the snow around him. The sound of gunfire echoed through the frozen landscape, drowning out the shocked murmurs from the Council's audience. A plasma bolt seared past his shoulder. He moved without hesitation, sprinting toward the nearest stalker. A shot to the knee brought the assassin down. A second to the head ended him. More fire, more movement. Cain was a blur of motion, weaving through the chaos, using the very assassins as shields against their own weapons. They were fast, trained, enhanced, but they were fighting a man who had spent his life killing things that were supposed to be unkillable. Another stalker fell, his body crumpling into the snow. Then another. The ranks broke. Panic. In the warship's command center, Vexlar watched in stunned silence. His claws gripped the edges of his console, disbelief shadowing his features. The footage played across every screen, the galaxy watching as one man turned an execution into a massacre. The remaining assassins tried to regroup, but it was too late. Cain was already in motion, carving through them with precision. A stolen blade sliced through armor. A well-placed shot ruptured a power core. He was methodical, unrelenting. The last assassin hesitated. Cain saw it in the split-second delay of his movements. Fear. Cain didn't hesitate. A final shot rang out, the assassin's body dropping lifelessly to the ice. Silence. He stood in the center of the battlefield, breath visible in the freezing air. His suit was soaked in blood, none of it his own. The broadcast feed cut abruptly, but the damage was done. The message had been sent. Vexlar's voice roared over the comms, his rage barely controlled. Deploy the rest of the garrison. Do not let him escape. Cain smirked, already moving. He had no intention of running. He disappeared into the ice storms, leaving nothing behind but the corpses of his would-be executioners. The hunt had begun. The warship's alarms blared empty air. Another assassin screamed, his body yanked into the darkness. Silence followed. One by one they fell. By the time the last remaining stalker stood alone, his breath ragged, his weapon shaking in his hands, he understood. They had never been hunting him. They had been prey. A shadow moved. The assassin barely had time to raise his rifle before Cain was on him. A brutal strike disarmed him. A second shattered his knee. He collapsed, gasping. Cain crouched beside him, voice calm. You don't understand what you were sent to kill. The assassin trembled. Cain leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. But you will. Then the knife slid in, and the stalker's body went still. The warship above relayed the reports, the remaining forces tracking every fallen squad. Vexlar listened in grim silence. The plan had failed. Cain was still alive. Worse, he was hunting them. The warship's command center was in chaos. Officers scrambled between consoles, issuing frantic orders, their voices sharp with barely contained panic. Security feeds flickered, showing only bodies. Elite assassins reduced to corpses, their armor cracked, weapons useless in their lifeless grips. The storm outside still raged, but the real tempest was inside the ship, where fear had begun to spread like a virus. Vexlar stood motionless, claws flexing against the control panel. His mind raced. This was impossible. The human should have been nothing more than an anomaly, a rogue element to be erased. Instead, he had turned the execution into a massacre, and now he was coming for them. A subordinate hesitated before speaking. Sir, the remaining squads are requesting evacuation. Cowards. He could smell their fear. It disgusted him. He turned sharply, voice cold. Deny it. If they run, they die anyway. The officer swallowed hard but nodded. Yes, Overseer. Vexlar exhaled, forcing his mind to steady. This was salvageable. The human was dangerous, yes, but he was still only one. They had the resources of an empire at their disposal. He tapped into the warship's command systems, bringing up thermal scans of the planet's surface. There, a faint, moving heat signature. He was heading toward the landing zone, where the Council's transport vessels were stationed. Of course, he was going to steal one. Clever but predictable. Vexlar's mandibles curled into something resembling a grin. Prepare the orbital bombardment. The officers hesitated. Sir, our forces are still on the ground. Then they should kill him before it's too late. No more games. No more arrogance. They would turn the surface into glass before they let this thing escape. Outside, Kane moved through the blizzard, each step precise. He had no illusions about the odds. They would throw everything they had at him now. Good. That made things simpler. His stolen weapons hummed with power, fully charged, taken from the bodies of those who had thought themselves unkillable. He reached the edge of the landing zone, a vast stretch of reinforced durasteel platforms, lined with sleek black vessels. A single pilot could take one of them off-world. He just needed a few minutes. A low hum vibrated through the air. He felt it before he heard it. Orbital cannons charging. He moved. The first explosion ripped through the ground behind him, sending a shockwave of heat and debris into the air. Then another. Fire rained down from the heavens. The Council's warship unleashing destruction with ruthless efficiency. Ships were obliterated where they sat, massive craters swallowing the landing zone in seconds. But Kane didn't stop. He was already leaping over fallen wreckage, dodging between collapsing structures. Survivors from the ground forces turned, spotting him through the smoke. They fired. He didn't hesitate. A shot to the head, another to the chest. He moved like a specter, relentless, precise. The bombardment continued, forcing him to change course. The last remaining ship, a heavily armored gunship, was still intact, its engines primed for departure. His only chance. The ground beneath him cracked as another blast struck, sending him tumbling forward. He hit the ground hard, the taste of blood filling his mouth. His vision blurred, but his body refused to stay down. Not here. Not like this. He forced himself up, sprinting through the carnage. The gunship's ramp was lowering. Inside, a single pilot was frantically preparing for takeoff, unaware of the danger closing in. Kane reached the ramp just as they had won. They thought this was over. They had no idea what was coming. Alarms blared across the warship as the stolen gunship closed in. Officers shouted over each other, scrambling for solutions, but none came. Kane was coming, and nothing in their training had prepared them for this. Vexlar stood rigid, mandibles clenched. Destroy that vessel. Turrets adjusted, locking on, but Kane was already maneuvering. The gunship weaved through incoming fire, barely slipping between plasma bursts. The dreadnought's defenses, built to repel fleets, struggled against one relentless pilot. He pushed the engines past their limits, cutting through the defensive perimeter. Impact tremors shook the warship's hull as the stolen ship crashed into one of the docking bays, metal screeching on impact. Fire and smoke filled the hangar. Silence. Then movement. Kane emerged from the wreckage, rifle raised. The first wave of security forces rushed in. He cut them down before they could react, his shots precise, movements controlled. No wasted motion. No hesitation. More guards arrived, reinforced by mechanized units. He pressed forward, weaving through cover, forcing them into crossfire. Explosions rocked the hangar as fuel lines ignited, sending bodies flying. He reached the control hub, tearing through opposition. Blood smeared the walls, smoke choked the air, but nothing slowed him. The ship's layout was clear in his mind. He knew exactly where he needed to go. Vexlar's voice echoed through the ship. You think this ends with me, human? You are one against an empire. Kane reloaded. You don't have an empire. You have fear. And that dies today. He breached the command center. Officers scrambled, reaching for weapons they had no time to use. Kane fired. The room fell silent. Vexlar stood alone now. Kane stepped forward, rifle trained. The overseer exhaled, shaking with rage. You think killing me changes anything? Kane didn't answer. A single shot rang out. The warship drifted, silent. Across the galaxy, the Council's broadcast faded to black.